Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and it's Jurassic James Explains, looking at Paraceratherium. So normally, as it works, I have the older on this side and you're on the other, but I only have one. So I actually looked into it, and there's only like three examples available. Of course, this is the 2009 Collect A Paraceratherium. There's a new one coming out for Collect A as well, and then there's like these, it's not out yet quite right now. There's these statues that are like this big, they're like $500, but that's not a toy, it's more of a statue. So as far as toys and models go, we're looking at this guy here. Now, like many of you, my first exposure of Paraceratherium was actually the Intricatherium in Walking a Prehistoric Beast, because the animal is this giant thing. That's, well, not to spoil to head in the video, but the idea is very simple. 1846, in Pakistan, but it's not Pakistan, the first fossils are found. Essentially, they're found all over Eurasia, Europe and Asia, and the skull was really notable at the animal. So when you think of a rhinoceros, you think of horns, basically, right? But in fact, many rhinoceros in the fossil record did not have horns, and in fact, it's not their horns that determine if it's a rhino, it's actually the teeth. And looking at the teeth of the animal, you're like, oh, this is a rhino of some sort, but it had a huge, huge skull. So the early interpretations pretty much gave it like a rhinoceros kind of like body plan, but just made it really big proportionally, which makes sense given the technology they had and well their understanding of the animal. And so over time they found more and more of them. They go, okay, this is something different. So the group Paraceratherium is known, the family and all that. So again, it is the tallest mammal, and the reason I specify tallest is that they're maybe heavier mammals. It's kind of like how Giganotosaurus is like bigger than T-Rex, but T-Rex is more heavy. You know, it's more dense, so it's stronger, right? So the idea here is that it's the tallest of the mammals, even taller than the modern giraffes. So they are rhinoceros. So first and foremost, I want to point out who are its relatives. Now again, what we now know as rhinos have split into multiple groups in the fossil record. And initially, well, I'll say it this way. So we have our modern species of rhino. So basically, we have an Indian rhino here. This is a 2010 safari. This is a white rhino from Mojo, 2012. And here is a black rhino, and it's from Discovery Kids. So in Africa, the way to tell a black and white rhino apart is that the black rhino has a little kind of like tapered point for the lip, and the white rhino has a flat lip because white rhinos eat grass, so they're munching on flat, low ground. They're great. They are grazers. The white rhino is, I'm sorry, the black rhino is actually a browser. So a little lip there, so we kind of get the leaves right. So these are African species. Here's the Indian species of rhino. And of course, in the fossil record, we have the woolly rhino, which is a different branch, basically, and of course, in Paraceratherium. So within the rhinoceros grouping, they are a part of what I mentioned last week, the Paracerdactyls, which are the odd-toed ungulates. Now, the rhinos are on this side. We also have tapirs. We have our friend Clocotherium. We have horses and brontotheres. And brontotheres should get their own video. They're essentially the rhinos before rhinos. They weren't rhinoceros. They just had a very similar niche in the environment, a role in the environment. And when they were around, in like in the Eocene, we know the ancestors of modern rhinos were smaller. So they took that niche. When they died out, the rhinos, some of them got bigger and became like them, and others became really big, right? So that's the Paracerdactyl, and I mentioned this more in my last Clocotherium video. But, sorry, yeah, but with this guy here, as far as accuracy goes, little cool points, it's hard to kind of judge it because it's the only one really out there, but one thing to point out is that they're about 15 foot or 16 feet to shoulder. And usually with dinosaurs, we measure at the hip, like T-Rex and like the theropods, they'll say, oh, they're this tall at the hip. For them, it's shoulder, because usually mammals, the shoulder's a little higher. And also the neck's about 8 feet long. Now, the only thing with the head, now, given that the year was made, this is the most accurate example. There are 4 toes. They only have 3. So Paracerdactyls, or odd-toed ungulates, some of them can have a 4th toe, but the main thing is the weight is distributed on 3 toes or 1 toe, like the horse. And so, for example, I believe some tapirs have a 4th toe, but there's no weight on it. It's just kind of like, it's not a dew claw like a dog, but it's still just not carrying heavy weight. I mean, they do have footprints where they'll walk in. You'll see it in the ground, but it's not holding the animal or supporting the animal much. So with this guy here, my 2 concerns with the model are, 1, given the time it was made, it's accurate, right? But we now look at the structure from the mouth, and it's thought to have like a tapir, like a small proboscis, not a trunk, just a small little bitty to help it. He said, well, why would I have that? Well, modern hide browsers like the okapi in the Congo and the giraffe in the savannah, these guys have these little extra tongues to go out and grab things. So either had a tongue that can print out, grab things, or this. The new model I saw coming out, Collect A, shows more of the little like trunk-like structure. So that's kind of like the future. But again, for this model, I bought this at the Gem and Mineral Show in Humboldt Civic Center many years ago. And I was so excited because it's the only one out there, right, at the time. Other thing to be concerned about is this overall appearance here, is that when you look at animals like elephants and sauropods, and these are not to scale. This one should be bigger, that one should be smaller compared to this guy. In general, when, all of the herbivores have small ancestors, and they have to adapt to being big. And so for a Camarasaurus or an elephant, what you're seeing basically is, because remember, this is an ungulate, it's like a hoofed animal, like a horse or gazelle kind of design. So what these guys did was their lower leg and ankles get fused together. So you see elephant feet or a skeleton or sauropod skeleton, they're all very tight, small, compact bones to absorb. And then what's going on is that for their legs, the tibia and fibula, the lower leg bones are shorter, and the femur and then the humerus are longer. What Paraceratherium did was different. It had the model doesn't quite show this, but right about there is where the humerus would be. This between my two fingers here. So the humerus would get really small, and this would be very long. So that's something that's not a big deal, but again, we don't have a complete skeleton of Paraceratherium. There's any big animal is hard to find a complete skeleton of, after sauropods. But the idea here is that the parts we do have, we're basing it on the other evolutionary trends. So it's a different approach to being big. Again, you're still eating high leaves. It's what sauropods and giraffes do, but they're doing it a different way. And again, it's a rhino's great attempt to do that. Now, as far as family, we have the family tree with Paraceratherium. We also have the contemporaries. So in, like, for example, North America with T-Rex, with the Hell Creek Formation. So in the Hell Creek we have like T-Rex, Edmontosaurus, Dakota Raptor, Triceratops, and Ankylosaurus. This is like the set group. And the late Jurassic with the Morrison Formation, where we have like Diplodocus and Allosaurus and Stegosaurus and Brachiosaurus, all those guys, right? Well, these guys are found in formations, but they're found like in a swath, a huge area. So there's not so much the number one animal associated with is a very large crocodile that's about 30 or 35 feet long. And so the crocodile, you'll see images of it like in a watering hole, and a crocodile like grabs it or whatever. I mean, that could be true too, if you're that big of a croc. But also I want to point out that when animals die, big animals die, they fall over and get scavenged upon. And crocodiles are like eating, not that they like, but they're adapted to eating very, like rotting dead animals too. So we have that for sure. But time-wise and location-wise, it would have seemed to look at theirs. There are these things called entelodonts, particularly they're called killer warthogs. But in this group, there's like pigs and like warthogs, and then there's peccaries in the New World, and then we have the entelodonts. They're a different branch, but they're closest to pigs, so I'll let it slide. The nivids, which are often called false saber-tooth, so I think I mentioned in the last video, saber-tooth cats. These guys have saber teeth before we call true saber-tooth cats, and were thought to be their ancestors, but it turns out they weren't. So they're called false sabers in the old textbooks. But in general, they're a saber-tooth cat-like thing. And of course, we have the hynodonts. Now, hynodonts are interesting because in the order Carnivora, we have seals, weasels, bears, dogs, cats, all that. It's like one group. The creodonts is their group, and they're a separate branch, basically. And the creodonts were the first large mammalian carnivores after dinosaurs to kind of take over, really. And then they were replaced by modern carnivora, the cats and bears we know today, their ancestors at least. So these are all animals that would have been contemporaries or living in the environment of Asia, Eurasia, during the Oligocene epoch. So about 33 million years ago. I will tell you this, though, that the Paraceratheriums, that lineage, survive into Miocene. That's a really big deal because in some ways, the break between the Jurassic and Cretaceous, Jurassic all these giant sauropods, Stegosaurus, Allosaurus, Cretaceous would be like raptors and feather dinosaurs and Triceratops, all those guys. It's a big changeover between those two periods. Well, for the mammal world, the Miocene is the start of when grass takes over. Now, we do know grass existed in the Cretaceous, small amounts. But by the Miocene, you would see actual like fields of grass. Now, grass to you and I is fun for sports, but grass for herbivores is not always fun because they have these cell walls and you have to break them down. And you've heard of chewing the cud. I mentioned that with the pterodactyl, that you're having to chew the food and swallow it and regurgitate it and chew it again because grass is very tough to break down. So a lot of the Eocene and Oligocene animals did not make it into the Miocene or tapered off. And the question then is, what happened to Paraceratherium? Why don't we have giant rhinos today? Well, the answer, well, there is no answer, but we think, is that think of the African savanna. You have elephants, right? African elephants, and these are not to scale quite, but you have giraffes, and we have buffalo, actual buffalo, and gazelles, and wildebeest, and zebras, and other things too. So most of these animals browse very low, the grasses. These guys, except for the horse, the zebra, most of these animals have ancestors that were small nothings in the Oligocene. And when the Miocene came over and the grass started showing up, their ancestors began to proliferate. There were a lot of them everywhere. Same thing, giraffes grew the longer necks. Elephants are unique because they eat grass, but also they knock down trees. So what's going on is that this is the environment where these guys feed low and these guys can feed high. Essentially, Paraceratherium, being a rhino, is a mixture of these two animals. The difference is we don't really know if they knock down trees a lot, but the idea here is that they are high browsers, right? Hence why they would have either the long tongue or the tapered snout. That being said, the question is what happened to them? Where they go, right? Well, in Africa, this crucible of evolution there, we see essentially the proboscids rising up. Now, proboscids is a name associated mainly with elephants because of proboscis, large nose, the proboscis monkey. So, for example, in the movie Ice Age, which this didn't live in the Ice Age, but it was in the movie Ice Age, this is a Belladon. This is a 2005 safari. So it's this large kind of like shovel tusk right here. So these guys are known from Africa and North America. And then we have a Dinosaur. This is a 2013 Mojo. This tusk going down. So elephants are trying between Oligocene and Miocene. The elephants are starting to radiate out what we now know as elephants or that ancestry, and they're trying different things. The next step, or the biggest jump in some ways in elephant evolution, were the Gomphotheres, these guys here. And so around the time that these guys are dying out, they're showing up. Now, I'm not saying that there were Gomphothere and Paraceratherium wars, because let's imagine that for a minute, about the like giant horse, the battle. That didn't happen, no. But the idea here, we think, is that their feeding strategy, I mean, we have a new kind of animal on the block, right? A new kind of competitor. So it's coming to, and they're migrating from Africa to Europe, across Asia, to North America. In fact, Gomphotheres get all the way across to South America. Starting in Africa and they migrate across the entire world. They miss Australia and Antarctica, of course, but they migrate a long way. And the idea is that the environment they're living in, these guys are adapted. When you're this big, you're locked into eating a certain set of things. You don't adapt. You don't change suddenly. And these guys come along and they're eating and competing with them. And maybe they're eating tall leaves too, or knocking the trees down. We don't know. But we also see a certain climate. So for these to survive into Maya seems pretty cool, but they're then replaced because at that point, these large elephant animals spread across the world. So it's not that there was a war or a peace treaty armistice. The idea is very simple, that a new group of animals comes along, the climate shifts, they adapt to it better. These guys, I mean, when you're that big, it's like in an ecology, when you're this specialized, you're this large, you're taking a lot of food in to power this body to be this big. Yes, you can migrate long distances, it's harder for predators to kill you, but it's a huge risk, no pun intended. That being said, the final thing to point out with these guys that people often bring up in papers are two points. One, when you were this big, Alexander, Dr. Zoologist, was suggesting that when you're this big, you're going to overheat. And we often think about like the dinosaurs, big animals, saying, well, are they warm-blooded or cold-blooded? That's pretty much settled at this point. But once you are a large animal and you have a lot of heat, you are warm-blooded, endothermic, you have to then not overheat. So we see hippos and rhinos and elephants going into, well, mainly hippos and elephants, going into water and trying to cool off. There are rhinos that, but not In the Miocene, we have these rhinos that kind of have the same role as a hippo in the environment. They'll be in the water and they're semi-amphibious. Not amphibian like the classification, but amphibious as in getting in water. And so this guy would try to cool off by, by any means necessary. I will tell you that Dr. Prothero, who wrote Life as Dinosaurs book, which I met him a few years ago, I have him on my mentors page on my website. He was suggesting, in his I went to his lecture, and he was suggesting maybe that they had large ears because if you think about elephants, the Asian elephants have small ears, African have really big ears, and the reason behind that is that on an open savanna, an African elephant, when you pull their ear out, they have all these veins, so the blood can cool. Not quite Dimetrodon style, but like there's an idea of they can flap their ears and cool off more. Whereas an Asian elephant, they usually live more in forested areas, more shade, more protection from the sun, so they don't have that issue of cooling off. Dr. Prothero, either maybe in jest, I'm not sure, but he was suggesting maybe that there may have been large ears here to cool off, but considering that other Paracerodactyls of today don't have large ears, most people don't agree with them. But then again, also, I will point out that this is a very unique Paracerodactyl, so if anyone would do it, it would be it. So that's not something that I would put in my own book, but it's an idea to be out there, because, we don't want to just assume things, right? The final thing, of course, is about their possible extinction, is gestation. So mammals have babies, they don't lay eggs, except for two in the modern world. 3 species technically, because there's 2 kinds of echidnas. But the idea is that a human, I've been told that a human woman has 9 months of gestation. An elephant has 22, people say 2 years. It's really like 22, 23 months of gestation. So if they're kind of like a rate, looking at how short mice and dogs and horses have, how long they're pregnant, that same idea kind of scaled up to these guys. I mean, they may have been pregnant for 3 years or so. So if you only have one baby every 3 or so years, that is hard for you to replace your species. I mean, mice have won the game. Mice are doing it. They're out there getting it, just making more of them, and they're out there everywhere. There's rodents have done really well, right, since the Paleocene or Eocene. So this guy, when you're so big, you can only have so many babies. Now sauropods bent the rules by having, we believe, lots of babies at the same time, like sea turtles. And the idea is that you're just throwing all your kids out there and saying good luck, and the few that can survive, you get your next generation, right? Mammals generally don't do that, so have a few babies together, or one baby at a time after so many years. And once you have the baby after 3.5 years, it then has to grow up and you have to take care of it. So in that situation, mom is out of the reproduction game, and she has to raise the baby to a certain age, and then we don't know where elephants we have the matriarchal herds and all that. We don't really have proof of that with Paraceratherium. We don't, because rhinos are usually solitary. But again, we can't apply just mono-rhino stuff to these guys. But the idea is that you're taking all this time to raise a baby to a certain age, and then at that point it can be off on its own, and then mom will reproduce again. So it's a long period of time of reproducing yourself. And so with that species, the size of the animal helps, but again, you're still vulnerable to changes in the environment. And the Oligocene is known for great changes because of climate shifts due to tectonics and so on. So it's an interesting animal. Like I said, I hope my hope for this video is that people who make models will say, we should make more of those giant rhino thingies, Paraceratherium, or in fact Jurassic all the other types of these. It's not just one species there. There's multiple in the family. And so hopefully they'll be like, we should make more of these. And you should petition them, say Mojo and Safari and Collect Day, we don't need new Triceratopses, we need more Paraceratheriums. Because I want to show a lot of them together and say, here's what's right or wrong, and here's the papers, but I only have one. Wait, we have not found their tails. So, sorry, just at the end of this talk, get it? We have not found the tails. So, again, looking at tapirs, horses, rhinos, we think short little tail, little poof on the end. But what if it had a horse tail, just long, flowing, what if it had a horse mane? We have no idea. So, future paleontologists figure it out for us. And this will be Paraceratherium. Next week we're doing Basilosaurus, the Eocene whale with 4 flippers. I jokingly call it the mosasaur of the Eocene, but people who study mammals hate that. So I won't say that in the video, I'm saying it now. That being said, I'll see you guys later. Thank you for tuning in.